Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to this early morning, middle of the night bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks, well, they're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this early morning, middle of the night bonus upload, shall we? Alright, so this early morning, middle of the night bonus is going to be just a variety of First Nation society information and lore, also experiences with these creatures. Let's jump into it. It was the late June of 1968. My dad was 12 and my grandparents had moved a few months earlier from Tucson to Concho, Arizona. Concho was vastly different than Tucson, both in landscape and temperature. Sitting at 5,000 feet above sea level, the summer temperatures were around 70 degrees versus the hundreds in summertime Tucson. Resting at the edge of the White Mountains, the land is red, yellow, and brown sandstone cliffs and butts against the larger ancient basalt flow ridge that lines the north from the Springerville volcanic ridge. Concho, well, Old Concho as it's referred to now, sits among the high-altitude desert, with large basalt ridge bordering the east and north. In the valley, a dry riverbed was dotted by large groves of cottonwood trees. The butts and ridges boasted large twisted juniper and cedar trees. Only about 200 people lived in Concho at that time. It's in pretty close proximity to the petrified forest, so petrified wood was plentiful on the valley floor. There were numerous ancient Anasazi ruins scattered along the valley. My great-uncle had moved his family to Concho as well. My grandpa had recently finished his civil engineering degree, and he and my great-uncle were doing highway construction all around the White Mountains. They had both purchased land in Concho area for very cheap. My great-uncle had two sons who were a year older and a year younger than my dad, Tony and Zach. Tony was 13, Zach was 11. My dad and his cousins were inseparable. They would spend their days exploring the surrounding landscape, accompanied by my dad's American bulldog, Sarge. They had found quite a few ruins, numerous pictographs, and some old abandoned adobe homesteads, probably from the late 19th century. Every morning, weather permitting, they would load up their bags with canteens, bologna sandwiches, and head out into the wilderness to play and explore. My grandparents and great-aunt and great-uncle rule was for the children to return by sunset. As my dad recalls, on one particular summer morning, they had hiked west towards the edge of the giant basalt ridge to explore. After going for about a mile or so, they came upon a arroyo running adjacent to the ridge. Large black boulders and giant slabs of sandstone peppered the wash. The banks were pretty steep, but they would have to cross it if they wanted to explore the ridge on the other side. They made their way down slowly. Once in the arroyo, they realized that the opposite bank was too steep to climb, so they started to follow it west to find a better place to climb up. My dad said as soon as they got into the riverbed, he started getting an unnerving feeling, like they were being watched. He said it was extremely quiet, no birds or cicadas chirping. It was hot as well. No breeze stirred the air. The further they walked down the wash, the more sense of urgency began to build in his gut. He didn't say anything, though, for fear that his cousins would laugh at him. About a half a mile down the wash, it made a bend around a large volcanic boulder. Suddenly, Sarge began a low growl, hair standing on his back. This startled all three of the kids. Looking around, they didn't see anything. So, encouraging the dog, they moved closer to the bend. Sarge stayed rooted in that spot, growling and snarling and barking. All three of the boys began to get scared. They agreed that maybe they should just turn around. They noticed that there was a spot where they could climb out of the wash that they hadn't noticed at first, but it looked almost like a game trail. Adrenaline fueling them, they hauled ass up the side of the embankment towards the ridge. The dog darted after them. The whole time, the bad feeling was growing stronger with my dad. Breathless, they stopped to the top to catch their breath. Sitting against a large boulder, they took some drinks from their canteen and assured each other that Sarge probably smelled a coyote or spotted a rabbit. Here the game trail was more apparent. It had even worn into some of the volcanic and sandstone protruding from the ground. Intrigued, they decided to follow it. They decided to follow it a ways and find a shady spot to eat lunch. They noticed that there was a lot of petrographs dotting the black rocks. Geometric shapes, animals, human figures, there was so many. Finally, they found a large juniper with gnarled trunk and ate their lunch in the shade. Bellies full and excitement replaced fear. They hurried along the trail as it slowly zigged and zagged to the side of the basalt ridge, avoiding large areas of rock falls. The pictographs began to change as well along the trail. Lots of spirals and horned-looking men. My dad even said there was one that looked like a UFO. Turning around a bend, the trail suddenly disappeared. Only open space of the edge of the cliff. There was nowhere else to go. Cliff drop off one side and a sheer cliff going up about 50 feet on the other. My dad said he was disappointed but a little relieved, as the sun was getting further west and they were pretty far from Concho now. They could see the town in the distance, as well as Zuni, Holy Mountain, and mesas that dotted the distant Navajo reservation. Although they were disappointed, they decided that it was worth looking at the view. They started making their way down the trail when they spotted an opening in the cliffside of the canyon they hadn't noticed on their way up. It was behind a large twisted cedar. The tree's shadow had hidden it. It looked almost like there was another trail going into the divide. The opening was only about 4 feet wide. Looking at this, that unnerving feeling returned to my dad. His stomach dropped and he felt like he was having twisted knots in his stomach. The hair on his back of his neck stood up. Tony suggested that they should detour and check it out. My dad protested, saying that they needed to get back. Zach stayed silent. He looked as frightened as my dad felt. Tony laughed when looking at them and called them both sissies. He said they didn't have to go and that would be fine. They could wait there for him and be babies if they wanted to. Sarge had run down the trail and was out of sight. My dad whistled for him, but he didn't return. Zach decided he'd follow Tony, so my dad stayed behind while they entered the narrow black-walled canyon. When they moved out of my dad's field of vision, the wind picked up, whooshing through the canyon and the trees making a creepy sound. It was quiet except for the wind, and my dad thought he heard faint voices in the air. He shivered, the ominous feeling growing stronger. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and still Tony and Zach hadn't returned. A large cloud that covered the sun and drops of rain began to fall. My dad moved under the cedar to get out of the light rain that had began to fall. He sat on a rock and began to shiver. Suddenly, something grabbed his shoulder. He jumped up about 3 feet and screamed. He heard laughter. It was Tony and Zach, and they looked extremely excited. "Luke, you'll never believe what we found," they exclaimed, almost breathless. "We found some Indian steps, and they lead into a cave." They begged my dad to come and see. It wasn't far, only about 10 minutes into the canyon. My dad followed reluctantly, knowing they weren't going to agree to go home until they showed him. Plus, he felt a little braver and more intrigued now. Sure enough, around the bend and about 20 yards into the canyon was wider here, about 20 to 30 feet across. And there indeed was foot and hand holds carved into the rock wall. My dad had seen steps like them before when his parents had taken him to Chaka Canyon National Park. They were smaller than the ones at Chaka, but only when they went up about 20 feet to the darkened mouth of the cave. He shivered, either from excitement or fear, he wasn't sure. From the bottom of the canyon, there was no way of telling how large the cave was. They dropped their packs and decided to use the foot and hand holds to climb up to the cave, against my dad's better judgment. The rain had stopped, but slowly and carefully they made their way because the rock had become slick. It took about 10 minutes to ascend. My dad called for Sarge from the top again. The dog still hadn't returned. The cave was much larger and deeper than they expected, and the entrance was decorated with hundreds of petroglyphs. The light didn't penetrate very far in, but they could see light in the distance from an opening in the roof, so they entered. Light adjusting to the dark, they started to notice the ground was covered with objects. What looked like rock and debris now revealed itself to be pots, beautifully painted pots. All of a sudden, they saw all pots of shapes and sizes, black on white, painted with geometric patterns and animals, red pots, even some yellow ones, larger corrugated pots holding dried corn and crusted squash and beans. There were also pots filled with arrowheads and beads, drums and flutes. They didn't touch anything and kept walking deeper into the cave. They looked around in shock and in awe. They had just discovered something big, something very big. They moved hurriedly now towards the second bit of light streaming from the crack in the roof. The cave was littered with all sorts of artifacts, stone axes, pots of all shapes, colors, and sizes. They felt as though they had just discovered King Tut's tomb. As they passed under the crack, they noticed now that there were objects in the alcoves of the wall. My dad moved closer to one, and his blood froze. He was looking at a human body. It was decayed skin and hair clinging to patches, and its mouth open in what looked like a silent scream. He leapt back. Tony and Zach also froze. The walls were lined with alcoves filled with ornately dressed bodies, lining the walls as far as they could see in the darkness. Suddenly, an ominous and horrendous penetrating screech broke the silence of the cave. All boys jumped, and my dad looked in the direction from where the sound came. He saw 2 red glowing eyes. He froze, locked in place by those glowing eyes. Suddenly the cave was washed over with a stench of decay and death. The eyes began to move towards the boy slowly. Another hideous growl screech jolted them from their petrified state. The eyes were moving fast now and right towards them. And they heard thudding and running footfall. They turned and tore out of the cave as fast as they could. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them in blind panic. The entrance to the cave was maybe 30 yards away. My dad looked back against his better judgment and saw a man on all fours or a giant coyote. He couldn't be sure. Streak across the light at the back of the cave. Its red eyes not blinking, he pushed himself faster, screaming for the others to run faster. They reached the edge of the cave, having to turn around and scramble back down the foot and handholds. Zach got there first and began descending as fast as he could. Tony was next, his face washed in horror as he went down the ladder. My dad's heart was hammering into his brain now. He turned and saw the eyes only about 20 feet from him. The stench of decay was overpowering. It made his stomach turn. Fast as he could, he placed his feet in the first set of handholds and started clambering down the rock face. He could hear the creature's breath now and even felt it. Oh my God, it was at the edge, and he refused to look up. Trying to concentrate on the hand and footholds, he heard Tony scream from below, and looked to see Tony lose his hold and slip about 5 feet from the bottom. He landed on his side and began to howl in pain. My dad slowed himself a bit, still not daring to look up. After what seemed like an eternity, his leapt from the cave side down and last 2 feet. Zach was helping Tony to his feet, and Tony was frozen, looking at the cave and the ancient staircase. All the color gone from his face. My dad was in full panic and, not looking, grabbed Tony and helped Zach drag him away. They flew down the little canyon. Finally, before they could pass the turn, my dad looked back to see the red eyes watching them from the darkness. Another howl or screech rang from the cave, and at that moment, Sergeant in full run came from around the bend, growling and barking. He ran to the foot of the handhold staircase and bellowed up at the cave, the hair on his back standing straight up. Snarling and growling, the sounds of the dog filled the canyon. As my dad turned the corner, he saw those red eyes retreat back into the cave. They emerged from the small canyon and stopped briefly to catch their breath. The sounds of Sarge barking and growling echoing down the canyon. Tony was crying now, his face awash in pain. His arm, he said, he thinks it's broke. Zach was silent. My dad asked Tony if he could make it home. Tony responded he sure the hell wasn't staying anywhere near whatever that was. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the canyon. It was a dog in pain. "Sarge!" my dad cried, but Tony and Zach had started running down the trail. "Sarge!" my dad screamed, again tears welling in his eyes. There was no response. It was quiet. "Sarge, come!" Still nothing. Suddenly, my dad thinks he hears something and looks up to the canyon entrance. Footfall. No, it sounds like drums. My dad sits there in confusion. Drums? What the hell? Is he losing his mind? The drums were getting louder. Is this in his mind? Where's Sarge? He can't leave him. My dad sees Zach tearing back up the trail. "Luke, we have to go!" The drums were louder now, and he could hear a faint chanting. Zach grabs my dad and jerks him to his feet. "Don't you hear that?" he screams and shakes my dad. "We have to run!" My dad was woken from his grief as fear washes over him again. He runs down the trail with Zach. Tony is waiting at the edge of the Aurora, waiting for them. The wash is now running, about 6 inches deep. They notice for the first time that a large thunderhead has developed to the south. A huge, large black storm dominating the southern horizon. Lightning flashing in the distance. A new source of danger crosses my dad's mind. Flash floods. He tells Tony and Zach that they need to cross the Aurora as fast as possible. If it flash floods, they'll be stuck on that side with the basalt ridge, with whatever that thing was. They make their way down the wash carefully and slowly. Tony is having a hard time because of his injured arm. They now hear the thunder rolling across the air, and the wind is increasing. My dad is keeping a close eye on the creek, which has only risen a couple more inches. They make all the way down and across the creek. The place where they crossed is only about 30 yards or so ahead, so they scramble their way towards it. The water is rising now at an alarming rate. They're going as fast as their legs will carry them. They're exhausted but keep pushing on. Suddenly, my dad, who is bringing up the rear, hears a loud splashing and panting coming from behind him. His heart drops. It followed them. It's getting closer. He closes his eyes and braces for impact. He feels something wet lick the back of his swinging hand. He turns, bracing himself for impact, and sees Sarge. Joy engulfs my dad. He bends down and gives Sarge a quick hug as the dog runs past, and the dog bounds after Tony and Zach as they climb up the Aurora. My dad runs and begins to climb. When he's almost to the top, he hears crashing and a loud snapping coming from the Aurora. Making it to the top, he sees a wave of brown debris filling the water, crashing through the wash. He falls to his butt and watches the flash flood fill the little canyon. Tony and Zach were lying on the ground, panting and gasping for air. My dad tries to catch his breath a little. He feels dizzy. He feels tears well up, and Sarge comes and licks his face, whining. My dad sees that Sarge is covered with blood. He looks over the dog and finds several slash wounds on his back and snout. His ear is almost torn off. They don't look too deep, but he can't be sure. Zach is the first to speak. He asks what it was. No one responds. Tony's arm is beginning to swell pretty bad, and it's only a few hours till dusk. They're all thirsty and realize in their panic they left their packs in the small canyon, along with their canteens. They are no longer in a hurry. They're exhausted. They drink some rainwater that had pooled in one of the sandstone boulders. They figure, whatever that thing was, it's not going to be getting across the Aurora for a few hours. So they slowly make their way to Concho as the thunderhead to the south continues to drench the landscape. The three boys and Sarge make it home around 8. The sun is set and my grandparents and great uncle and aunt are worried sick. They are relieved and angry until they see the condition of the trio and the dog. The boys tell them of their horrendous tale, and Tony's parents rush to Tony and bring him to the nearest doctor in Hallbrook. That night, my dad sleeps with Sarge at the end of his bed. Despite his extreme exhaustion, he is plagued with nightmares. One is especially terrifying, where he sees the red eyes looking in through his window. When he wakes, though, in the morning, the curtains are closed. The rains continue for 2 or 3 days. The boys didn't leave their home, still terrified of what happened. My grandpa and great uncle are convinced what the boys encountered was a mountain lion, but they are intrigued by the story of the Indian burial ground. A few days later, when the weather is clear, they tell the boys they want to see this cave. They make the journey faster this time, using my great uncle's Willie's Jeep. My grandpa and great uncle also bring a couple of shotguns and rifles in case the lion is still in the cave. The boys show them where the aurora, which filled with new boulders and broken trees from the flood. They find the trail and start making their way up. My grandpa on the front and great uncle taking the rear. They find the boys' packs caught in a cedar bush. They've been shredded and are in tatters. My grandpa figures they must have been caught by another flood and ended up in the trees. They finally make it to the little hidden canyon, which is now blocked by a juniper that washed down during the rain. My grandpa and great uncle get the log out of the way and they go down into the canyon to the Indian staircase. When they look up, though, they can make out the darkness of the cave. The water washed away all signs of the boys' previous passage. My grandpa figures maybe at this time of the day the cave will be more illuminated, so he and my great uncle climb up the foot and handholds to the top. The boys wait at the bottom, having no desire to go back up there. It's only my dad and Zach. Tony, with his broken arm, stayed home. My grandpa calls down for them to climb up. They do as they're told and climb up. When my dad reaches the top, he's stunned. The cave is gone. It's only a 20-foot rock alcove next to a black basalt cliff covered with petroglyphs. He's confused, looks around wordlessly. He goes over to the wall looking for cracks or seams and sees nothing. My grandpa and great uncle question the boys. Were they making up stories? No, they weren't. Something attacked Sarge, and the boys hadn't made up being so frightened. They conclude that the boys must have forgotten where the cave was. The dads aren't mad. It's a neat area. Maybe some other weekend they could look for the cave again. My dad and Zach know this is where the cave was. There's no doubt in their mind. They found their packs and even passed by the UFO petroglyph. But they couldn't convince the adults, so they make their way to the Jeep that's parked on the far bank of the Aurora. As they load up, the sun's sinking low in the western sky. My dad looks back at the black basalt ridge, wondering if maybe it was all just a dream. Something in the shadow of the cliff catches his eye. He squints again against the sun and sees two red, shining eyes looking back at him. His blood runs cold. He turns around as the Jeep pulls away. My grandparents only stayed in Concho for another few months, as soon as my grandpa finished the highway project. He got a job offer in the U.S. Virginia Islands. My dad said after the encounter he had nightmares every night, and would swear at night he'd see those red eyes at night outside of his house, until they finally moved from Concho. My dad never had a nightmare about those eyes again, but it wasn't his last encounter with the red-eyed creature. He would see it again when he was an adult, but that is a story for another time.
What an absolutely chilling experience. Let's jump into some very chilling information and theory.
The Hopi Indians settled in the U.S. state of Arizona and who claimed to have come from a continent that had disappeared in what is now the Pacific Ocean. Remember that their ancestors were instructed and helped by beings that moved on flying shields, and that they taught the technique of tunnel construction and underground installations. Many other legends and indigenous traditions of the American continent speak of the existence of communication networks in underground cities. There is a large literature, enough researchers who support the hypothesis that intelligent beings unknown to us live below the surface of our planet. There are various hypotheses about the possibility that intelligence from outside of our planet have subterranean or underwater footholds on planet Earth. The Hopi claim that their ancestors came from sunken islands in the remote past in what is now the Pacific Ocean, and that those who helped them in their exodus to the American continent were human-like beings who mastered the technique of flight and the construction of tunnels and underground facilities. The Hopi are now settled in the state of Arizona, near the Pacific coast. Between them and the coast is the state of California, and in the extreme north of California there is a snowy, white volcano called Shasta. The native legends of the place explain that inside there is an immense city that serves as a refuge for a race of white men endowed with superior powers, survivors of an ancient culture that disappeared in what is now the Pacific Ocean. The only alleged witness who entered the city, Dr. Dorrell, stated in 1931 that the way in which the buildings were built reminded him of Mayan or Aztec construction. The name Shasta does not come from English, nor from any Native American language or dialect. Instead, it's a Sanskrit word, which means wise, venerable, and judge. Without having a notion of Sanskrit, the native traditions speak of its tenants as venerable beings who dwell inside the White Mountain because it is a gateway to the inner city of millenary antiquity. More recent notifications from the inhabitants of a nearby weed lumberjack colony refer to sporadic appearances of beings dressed in white robes that enter and leave the mountain, only to disappear again as a bluish flash that can be seen. Narratives collected from the Sioux Apache confirm that conviction of the Hopi and indigenous people of Mount Shasta region that in the subsoil of the American continent dwells a race of white-skinned beings, survivors of a land sunk in the ocean, but also much further north. In Alaska and even further north, Eskimos and natives speak again and again of a race of white men that live in the subsoil of their territories. Descending towards the south in the spring of 77, a belief that under the pyramid of the sun in the city of the gods hides on the opposite side of the earth's crust, that is, in the interior underground, a city in which the white god is said to be found. If from here we move to the Yucatan Peninsula, we will find in its extreme north, hidden in the thickness of a jungle, a city discovered in 1941 that extends over an area of 48 kilometers, and that keeps in the silence of oblivion more of 400 buildings that in some remote time knew splendor. It was found by a group of boys who were playing in the vicinity of a lagoon where they used to bathe, ran into a wall of worked stone hidden by vegetation. Not having the Mexicans sufficient resource to undertake an exploration of the place, they required North American help. Attending two archaeologists specializing in Mayan culture. Attached to the Middle American Research Institute of the University of New Orleans. They also determined that the project to clean up and study the enormous city exceeded their possibilities, so they would have to create an association with other entities. World War II managed to momentarily shelve the project until 1956. The University of New Orleans associated this time with the National Geographic Society and with the National Institute of Anthropology of Mexico, resumed the investigations. Andrews, the archaeologist who led the expedition, dedicated himself, while the team of workers began to clear the buildings, to collect information among the natives of the region. A shaman told him that the city was called Tzbilcholta, a word that was unknown in the local Mayan language, and that the lagoon was called Sleka, which translates to Old City. Wanting to find out the reason for this name, the North American archaeologist was told a legend handed down by the natives from generation to generation, which stated that at the bottom of the lagoon there was a part of the city that rose above on the jungle, according to the narration of the old shaman. Many centuries before, there was a great palace In the city of Dzvilcholta, one afternoon, an unknown old man arrived at the place and requested lodging from the ruler. Although showing obvious ill will, he nonetheless ordered his slaves to prepare a room for the traveler. Meanwhile, the old man opened his traveling bag and took out a huge green gemstone, which he gave to the sovereign as a token of gratitude for the lodging. Surprised with the unexpected present, they questioned the guest about where the stone had come from. As the old man refused to answer, his host asked if he had any other precious stones in his bag. And since the interrogated continued to remain silent, the sovereign flew into a rage and ordered his servants to immediately execute the foreigner. After the crime which violated the sacred rules of lodging, the cacique himself checked his victim's bag, supposing that he would find more valued objects. But in his despair, he only found some old clothes and an unattractive black stone. Filled with rage, the sovereign threw the stone out of the palace. As soon as it fell to the ground, a formidable explosion originated, and immediately the ground opened, engulfing the building, which disappeared under the waters of the well, which emerged at the exact point where the stone fell to the ground. The sovereign, his servants, and his family ended at the bottom of the lagoon, and they were never seen again. So far, the legend. But let's continue with these ruins of the Yucatan Northern. The expedition ended up unblocking the pyramid that housed idols different from the usual representations of Mayan deities. Other nearby building would be revealed as much more important. It was a construction that totally differed from traditional Mayan styles, offering architectural features never seen in any of the known Mayan cities. Inside the temple, all adorned with representations of marine animals, Andrews discovered a secret sanctuary, walled off with a wall, in which there was an altar with 7 idols representing deformed beings, hybrids between fish and men, being similar, therefore, to those who in remote times revealed inconceivable astronomical knowledge to the Dogon in Central Africa and to those referred to by the Assyrian tradition when they speak of their divinity, Oannes. In 1961, Andrews returns to Dzvilcholta, accompanied by his associates, 2 experienced divers, who had to complete the better equipment the dive attempt made in 1956 by David Conkle and W. Robindet, who reached the depths of 45 meters, at which they gave up due to the lack of prevailing light. In this second attempt, the divers were the experienced archaeologist Marden, famous for having found the 1956 remains of the HMS Bounty, the ship of the Great Mutiny, and the B. Little House. After the first probes, they saw clearly that the lagoon developed in a shape similar to a boot, continuing underground to a point that the diving archaeologists were unable to determine. Upon reaching the bottom of the vertical, they noticed that there was a fairly steep slope there, heading toward the underground section of the shaft, and there they found several remains of carved columns and remains of other constructions, with which it seemed to confirm that the legend of the sunken palace was based on a real event. This enclave of the Yucatan presents certain similarities with the ruins of Nan Matol, the dead city of the Pacific Ocean, in which Native Americans claim to have come from. There is also an enigmatic abandoned city devoured by the jungle. At those feet in the depths of the sea, the divers also discovered columns and buildings engulfed by the water. We are going to the other coast of Mexico, slightly further south, in Jalisco, and about 120 kilometers inland from Cape Cornetez. The indigenous people say that the underground temple is hidden, in which the empire of the universe once stayed. And that when the current evolutionary cycle ends, the ancient displaced people will once again rule the earth with splendor. Such an affirmation is related to the legacy contained in the passageways of Tawuwari in the jungle of Ecuador. From here to the south to the Mexican state of Chiapas, along the border of Guatemala, some different white-skinned natives live there, for whose underground secrets President Roosevelt himself had already been interested in March 1942. Well, the Lacandones, who know of their ancestors, say that in the extensive underground network that crisscrosses their territory, some gold sheets are found in some secret place, on which someone left written the history of the ancient peoples of the world, in addition to describing precisely what would be the Second World War, which would involve all of the most powerful nations on Earth. This story reaches Roosevelt's ears a few months after the United States suffered the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Similar gold plates are also closely related to those that we will later see are hidden in the aforementioned tunnels of the Tawuwari in Ecuadorian East. Let's continue south. The next step that is taken from Chiapas steps on the Guatemalan soil. In 1689, the missionary Francisco Fuentes Guzman had no problem describing wonderful structure of tunnels of the town of Pachuta, which runs through the interior of the earth to the town of Tecpan in Guatemala, located about 50 kilometers from the beginning of the underground structure. At the end of the 40s of the last century, a book appeared titled Incidents of a Trip to Central America, Chiapas, and the Yucatan, written by North American lawyer John Lloyd Stevens, who visited Guatemala on a diplomatic mission in the company of his friend and artist Frederick Catherwood. There, in Santa Cruz del Quiche, an old Spanish priest recounted his visit years before to an area located on the other side of the mountains and 4 days' walk in the direction of the Mexican border, which was inhabited by a tribe of natives that still remained in the original state in which they were found before the conquest. At the press conference held in New York sometime after the publication of the book, he added that, gathering more info in the area, he found out that these natives had been able to survive in their original state thanks to the fact that whenever strange troops appeared, they hid under the earth in a subterranean world endowed with light, whose secret was bequeathed to them in ancient times by the gods who dwell underground. And he provided his own testimony of having begun to retrace a tunnel under one of the buildings in Santa Cruz del Quiche, through which, in the opinion of the natives, it was once possible to reach Mexico in an hour. In October of 85, together with San Jose Benitez and the Vilches brothers and Gretchen Anderson, who, by the way, was born at the foot of Mount Shasta, where we started this, there was an opportunity to access a tunnel excavated in the subsoil of a farm located in the mountains of Costa Rica. They entered a large cavity, and it gave way to an artificial tunnel that descended almost vertically into the depths of the terrain. The locals, who had been cleaning that tunnel of earth and stone that blocked it for years, told of a story affirming that at the end of this is the Temple of the Moon, a sacred building, one of several buildings expressly built underground millennia ago by an unknown race, which, according to their records, had built an underground city of over 500 buildings. And further south, in 1986, alone in a intricate jungle that in the Ecuadorian Amazon would take to the mouth of a tunnel system known as Los Teos, Tawari in the language of the Javaras who guard them, in which the Hungarian ethologist, seeker, adventurer, and miner Janos Marquez had found years before, and after searching the entire South American subcontinent, an authentic library of metal plates. In them, the chronological relationship of history to humanity, the origin of man on Earth, and the scientific knowledge of the extinct civilizations were engraved with signs and ideographic writing. According to these testimonies collected from there, 2 main underground paths departed, one headed east toward the Amazon basin in Brazil territory, and the other headed south to run through the Peruvian subsoil to Cozumel, Lake Titicaca on the border of Bolivia, and finally reach the area bordering Arica in the extreme north of Chile. According to the information carefully collected in Brazil by a German journalist, Karl Brugger, with whose murder in the 80s the documents of his investigation disappeared, various cities hidden in the wilderness would be found in the upper Amazon basin, buildings that were built by beings from outer space in remote times, and which would connect with a system of 13 hidden cities inside the Andes mountain range. Linking with this knowledge, we know from the time of the conquest that the natives hid their enormous wealth underground to avoid looting by the Spanish. Everything seems to indicate that they used the underground system that existed long before, built by a race long before the Inca, and to which some of them had access thanks to the legacy of their ancestors, possibly the Atacama Desert in Chile is the end of the journey in the extreme south. We are talking then at the end of the journey of the area that the traditions of the Hopi Indians cited at the beginning of the article, up there in North American Arizona. They point to a point of arrival of their ancestors who, aided by beings who mastered both the secret of flight and construction of tunnels and underground facilities, they were forced to hastily abandon the lands they occupied in what is now the Pacific Ocean. But the location of the specific signals which exist, the adequate deciphering of their corrective keys which exist, as well as the decision to take the committed step inside is, as always, happens in every sincere seeker, such a task comprised as non-transferable.
You have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed this early morning, middle of the night bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Some chilling experiences and information. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that helps the channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on your children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.